talking to Brad Katz. He and I have been friends for quite a few years, but we're going to be talking about healthy financial behavior in these times. So it's a little bit of a departure from our norm, but healthy finances lead to less stress, lead to better overall health. So, like I said, Brad and I have been friends for quite a few years. We just missed each other in college, but Brad, tell us a little bit about your background in finance and what you do. I mean, I know you own Lifelong Investors, so give me more.
So thanks, Dr. Bennett. So as Dr. Bennett said, my name is Brad Katz. I am the founder and president of Lifelong Investments out in Fairfield, New Jersey. We are an independent personal financial planning firm. What we do is we help our clients plan for the big life events that they encounter while protecting them from the unexpected along the way. That's kind of our mission and our value. And of course, we've just experienced a massive unexpected.
Absolutely. So how did you get into finances? And you're going to see me looking around because I have notes everywhere.
No problem. No problem. So I've been in the financial services field for 23 years. I originally started out because my older brother was in the profession and he suggested it would be a reasonably decent profession to join, and he had a friend who had an office that had room for one, so I decided to take him up on it, and the rest, as they say, is history. I have moved on from that original office to a new firm for almost 10 years, and then just about 13 years ago, I decided to start and found Lifelong Investments, which is...
Are we really that old?
We are that old, my friend.
Really that old?
We are.
And Lifelong Investments, what's your, I know you said it, but I want everybody to understand it.
Sure.
What is the goal of the firm?
So the goal of the firm is to help and educate our clients on understanding their money, understanding their financial plan, helping them craft one if they don't have one, and basically navigating the markets for the big life moments such as buying a house, having children and putting them through school, retirement planning, of course, all the same time while helping protect them from the unexpected landmines that are bound to happen.
And there have been some landmines over the course of the last month and a half, 2 months, correct?
That is an understatement, my friend. There have been big landmines, sea mines, you name it, mines galore.
And I want to go back because I read your newsletter from last week, and it had some interesting perspectives in it that I want to touch on. But so in emergency situations like this,
yes,
what should or how much should somebody have on hand? I'm assuming that's going to be in cash.
Yes, that's an excellent question. And I think that one of the most important things that anybody should craft into their financial plan might even be the first thing on the list is to have a healthy emergency fund. And yes, absolutely, cash is king for emergency funds. Now, it doesn't have to be cash in a box in your house. It just means something that's easily accessible and doesn't fluctuate in price. The interest you earn on your emergency fund is borderline irrelevant. It just has to be something that's there. Now, that amount varies from person to person based on how they're employed and based on where they are at their station in life. But as a rule of thumb, I like to say most people want to be somewhere around 3 to 6 months worth of expenses in cash emergency funds. So if your household is spending $3,000 a month to run your life, you want to be somewhere between $9,000 and $18,000 in cash.
Okay. So that's covering mortgages, covering everything, or just talking about necessities?
No, I'm saying covering everything. Your monthly expenses, soup to nuts, so that the idea of your emergency fund is that in case of an emergency, you can go on living the lifestyle that you're accustomed to while you're trying to make it through the lean time. So yes, your mortgage, your utility bills, your car payment, your insurance, gas for the car, your daughter's braces, your kids' travel sports, you name it. You want every single solitary bill worked into that plan.
Okay. And also including some emergency cash.
So emergency cash, which actually makes a lot of sense. I call that the unexpecteds. That's the condenser on your house broke. Your son hit a baseball through the neighbor's window type things. Your car is out of warranty and it broke down. Those are like those big costs. And generally, I think that varies from person to person, but it realistically boils down to a percentage of your annual income. And reasonably speaking, I think somewhere around 3 to 5% of your annual income is a reasonable number. Or if you're looking for kind of like a hard and fast rule, something to the tune of about $10,000 on a minimum basis.
Okay. And I'm going to assume, and this usually gets me in trouble, is that doesn't count credit cards.
No, it doesn't count credit cards, because to me, a credit card is more or less either a bad debt that someone has or nothing more than a function of paying their bills. So for example, in my house, we use our credit cards to buy basically everything we purchase on a monthly basis, but we pay the bill in full every month. So the money that I would be spending on a credit card is part of those monthly expenses I was referencing before. So eating out, buying groceries, buying gas for the car, etc. Now, carrying a balance is a completely different animal.
Okay. So if you're doing your monthly budget, you would also be figuring in that payment to what you need is cash on hand if you have a credit card balance.
Yes. So if you have a credit card balance, first and foremost, yes, you're going to want to factor in a portion of that monthly payment as part of your emergency fund, that monthly budget. But you kind of almost dovetailed there into the second most important part of a financial plan, which is erasing bad debt. So I always advise our clients that once you've established that emergency fund, the next order of business is to eliminate what I'll call bad debt. And when I say bad, I don't mean it's gone bad or it's not being serviced properly. I mean something that is effectively costing you more than in reality it really was, because now you're paying an interest payment on something for something that you purchased in the past. So the idea is to pay that off or pay that
down as quick as possible.
Exactly.
Gotcha. So right now, if I'm nervous about the markets, which I am, every time I look at them, one day it's green, one day it's red, next day it's green, then it's red, then it's red, then it's red. So what should somebody do right now if they're nervous about the markets?
That's an excellent question.
Yeah.
And that's a question that I've been getting on a daily basis for the last 7 weeks. And I would argue that if you're not nervous about the market, you are either not paying attention or you're probably lying about it, because everybody's nervous about what's been going on. I'm a big fan of perspective, and I'm happy to talk to that. But your question was, what should you do right now if you're nervous about the market? And I think the most important thing is to assess or reassess your risk tolerance for your investments. And let me explain what that means.
Good.
Let
me interject something right here.
Sure.
Before you explain that. If you're listening and you're live here or after the fact, if you have a question, put it in the comments and we'll try to address them before we sign off, or we'll address them later on. Okay, go ahead. Explain that to us.
So your risk tolerance, assessing it, what do I mean by that? Well, in simplistic terms, old-fashioned financial advisors would classify their clients and investors into generically 3 groups: the conservative investor, the aggressive investor, and the moderate investor. And you'd have a questionnaire that you'd give someone back in the late 80s or mid 90s that said, tell me your attitude towards risk. So I know from experience that that is relatively silly because nobody really knows the answer. So a real risk assessment is to look at your numbers, how much you've got invested currently, how much in your personal account, your retirement accounts, your kids' college funds, your 401k at work, and using a little bit of planning software to determine how much you can actually stomach seeing that balance drop over a particular period while trying to accomplish seeing that balance grow over a similar period. So at Lifelong Investments, for example, we use a risk assessment tool. It takes our clients about 4 or 5 minutes to do. It's web-based, right on our website, or I can give out the link in the commentary afterwards. And it effectively asks you to input the dollar amount of your account, and then it starts asking you a couple questions. So as a simple example, if you had $50,000 invested, it would say, in 6 months, would you be happy with your account going up to 60,000, but risking it dropping to 40,000? Or would you be more comfortable with it going up to, say, 53,000 while only dropping to 48,000? So it asks these if A, then B questions a few times until it kind of pinpoints what your gut feeling risk score is. And we call it your risk number. And the concept of that risk number is to get your brain and your gut to talk to each other so you know what's right and you can feel what's right. So when things go on like we have going on right now, you can give yourself permission to watch your account drop within your risk tolerance number, knowing that more often than not, it will likely go up to the level or within the level that you're comfortable with. That's why we call it your risk tolerance level. And I know that was a little bit detailed, but it's a very interesting topic that most people hear the words but don't fully understand why or how it's important.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And those risk factors, I would assume, change depending on the stage in life you're at.
Absolutely. I can argue that if you're 35 years old, you very well may have a different outlook and attitude than if you were 65 years old and on the cusp of retirement. But that's not always the case, actually, because a 65-year-old who may decide that he or she really wants to work until 75 may actually have a little bit more of an aggressive feel, because there's also some personal attitude and personal feelings involved in risk tolerance. It's really not a very cookie cutter thing. But generally speaking, yes, where you are time horizon wise and what your plan or goal is, certainly that'll change over time. And what's going on currently. I could ask somebody what their risk tolerance was, find out that they were extremely aggressive, redo that with them last week and find out they may not be as aggressive as they once thought.
It's always easy to be aggressive when you're not involved in turmoil.
Exactly. It's very, very true.
Always easy. Always easier.
But to answer your question, kind of circling back, what you should do right now if you're nervous, absolutely get your risk assessment and get your risk score to find out where you can live comfortably, then compare it to what you own.
And you have that on your website, you said?
I do.
So I'll take the link and we'll post it in the comments afterwards, and whoever wants to take the assessment can take the assessment. That's a great tool. Everybody loves the quiz to find out what they are doing.
Right.
And sometimes you need the questions asked from somebody else. Like when I ask somebody their health questions, they sort of look at me like, why do you need to know that? Well, it gives the whole picture.
Correct.
So let's flip it just a little bit, because I listen to way too much talk radio, and, some are saying buy, some are saying sell, some are saying stay in the middle, don't do anything, ride it out. So what if I see opportunity now?
That's an excellent question. That is probably the most, or if not the most, at least the second most frequently asked question I've been getting the last few months. And I don't want to speak to any stocks or companies in particular, but as I'm sure you can imagine, there are some in industries that have been completely obliterated and beat up on a stock price. And people are looking at this going, well, gee, you know what? Someday we're going to come out the other side of this. And I feel like company X is probably still going to be here. So would it be sensible for me to buy that right now? So if you see opportunities, here's my 3-point checklist on opportunity. Number one, dovetail that opportunity with your risk tolerance. In other words, cross-reference the company or the investment strategy with the risk tolerance that you're comfortable with. Make sure it fits, because above all, that is the most important thing. The second piece of that checklist is to do a little bit of research, and that can be done any bit of ways. You can look at various stock research quote systems on the internet, MSN, Yahoo, Investors Business Daily, E-Trade, Fidelity, pick one, it almost doesn't matter. And then the third method is to employ some help from a professional if the opportunities that you're considering are either a little bit more involved than you want to research, or you simply don't want to put in the research time because you have like other things to do with your life. So you want to kind of outsource that and bounce that idea off of someone who's kind of seen it. Because to your point, if you watch TV, not to pick on the talking heads on the media, as I'm a talking head right here on your screen, but there is no shortage of opinions, and fear and scare sell advertising on TV. That's a fact. More importantly, a lot of people that come on TV on these TV shows for entertainment purposes on the financial news are really just what I'll call talking their book. So I also say follow the money. When they have that seasoned professional from XYZ Incorporated Financial talking about the worst thing in the world to invest in is blah, 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 look and see if that company happens to either A, own blah, blah, blah already, and if not, are they trying to drive that price down so they can buy it? Maybe they're short it. There's definitely litany of examples showing that to be the case.
Wow. I never thought of it that way. But yeah, they would definitely have a direct influence on when they're talking. Yeah.
Exactly. That's why an independent, unbiased approach as a kind of an overseer for you is often one of the most important things. Somebody who doesn't have a vested interest in the specific investment at hand and has a vested interest in you personally.
Awesome. So that was, I got number one, dovetail with your risk factor.
Correct.
Number two was
do some research on the opportunity.
Did I miss number three?
No, number three was to seek out professional guidance from somebody who has an independent, unbiased opinion.
I ran them both together, but it's true. You can do so much on your own. I mean, I provide tons of free health information to people, but there's a certain point where you need certain testing done. You need certain things done. You need an expert to step in and do it. I mean, you don't. I wouldn't play with rebuilding my car engine. Go get the expert.
Mm-hmm.
And the same applies in your field.
Without a doubt, my field is actually diabolically simple if you have the time and the interest to do it yourself. A lot of people don't. And that's where the experts come in. I joke with people all the time. You tell me if you want soda. I'll try to do the research to determine if you should own Coke or Pepsi. That's my job.
So that's good advice. If you're liking what we're talking about, please give us a thumbs up or a heart. But if you have any questions, write them in the comments. So 3 weeks ago, federal government came out with the CARES Act.
Yes.
I can't even remember what the acronym stands for, but there's a ton of money in theory floating around out there. So
That is true, in theory.
in theory, what can someone do to navigate, or can you give us some advice on navigating the CARES Act?
Absolutely. So there are a few very important pieces of the CARES Act that everybody needs to know about. The first are these, what they were calling stimulus checks. That's that $1,200 per adult check that the government was supposedly sending to every American. Well,
Supposedly, the talking heads told me that they went out last week. 10
that's
million
allegedly
Americans got them. I haven't talked to anybody who's gotten anything.
That's supposedly correct. Now, there are a couple of caveats to that. Number one, if you're a single filer, and this is going to be based on your most recent filed tax return. So if you already filed your 2019 tax return, it's based on that. If you had not yet filed, it's based on your 2018 tax return. So if you're a single filer and you earned over $75,000 on your most recently filed tax return for adjusted gross income, or AGI, not taxable income, that's after deductions. Adjusted gross income is prior to deductions. It's what they call sometimes the top line. Anyhow, if your adjusted gross income is greater than $75,000, you don't qualify to receive that $1,200 check. And if you're married filing a joint tax return with your spouse, if your income is over $150,000, you don't qualify to receive that $2,400 check, the one for each of you. If you have children, I believe it was $500 per qualifying child. But again, subject to those income limits. And there was a phase out to, I believe, $95,000 and $198,000. But effectively, in simplistic terms, if you're over $100,000 single or $200,000 joint, you're not going to see that check at all. So that's one thing. People receiving Social Security, you are eligible to receive that stimulus check. That is going to happen. So that was one of those big provisions of the CARES Act. Another big provision of the CARES Act is for those who are either small business owners or self-employed or independent contractors or gig workers. So if you run your own business, if you're a 1099 contractor or a salesperson for another company, a consultant, an Uber driver, whatever the case may be, you are actually eligible to either A, participate in the PPP, or the Paycheck Protection Program, or qualify for unemployment compensation. Now, unemployment compensation rules will differ slightly from state to state. So my advice is to start out with your State Department of Labor website to navigate the unemployment process. However, if you're thinking you may qualify for that Paycheck Protection Plan, a place to start for gaining information, and do it quickly because it's a first come, first served program, would be the Small Business Administration at SBA.gov. Now, they'll give you the information, but the Small Business Administration, or SBA, is actually not the lender. The lender is going to be a local bank. Most of the banks that I've seen have generally limited applications to existing clients. So starting out with the bank that your company has its business relationship with is really the first place to go. And a second bit of advice that I've shared with lots of people is to start with someone who's more of a local bank. So if you're out in, say, Eastern Pennsylvania, don't start with one of those big money center banks. I don't want to name names like Bank of America or Wells Fargo. But I would recommend maybe one of the smaller banks like Stroudsburg Bank or something along those lines, simply because there's going to be less volume and you might have an easier chance of getting through the system, which is becoming a bit of a backup on the CARES Act. A couple of other provisions that I think are very important with regards to the CARES Act have to do with retirement plans. We know that if you are a contributor to your corporate retirement plan, a 401k, either as an employee or as an employer, or a personal retirement plan like a SEP, or even an IRA, an individual retirement account, Generally, the rules for taking money from those accounts are that you have to be over age 59 and a half in order to take a distribution penalty free. So a distribution is typically taxed as ordinary income at whatever tax bracket you're in, plus an additional 10% penalty applies if you're under 59 and a half with no exceptions. The CARES Act effectively does a huge thing for liquidity for people who need to take money from their retirement accounts. Number one is that 59 and a half rule is waived. So you can take a distribution now prior to age 59 and a half, and it's going to be penalty free. So that 10% early withdrawal penalty is waived. It's still a taxable distribution, but there's actually two caveats to that, Dr. Bennett. The first is that you are actually given 3 years to pay the income tax on the distribution that you take. It is not taxable in the year it's taken, and no withholding has to happen when it's taken. So if you took money from your 401k with a 20% mandatory withholding tax, they're not going to withhold it. And you have 3 years to pay the tax due. That's not all. The second part of the CARES Act gives you the ability to replace the money you distributed into that retirement plan during that same 3-year period and have it treated as a rollover. What that means is if you put all of the money back within that 3-year window, the IRS will count that as a rollover, which means that you never touched the money technically, which means there is no tax liability at all.
Nice.
Hypothetical example, I take $25,000 from my 401k plan. I will not pay tax on that, and I have 3 years from the date that I take it to replace that $25,000 into a retirement account. If I do, I now owe not a cent in income tax for taking that $25,000 out. If I do actually choose to not put it back in, the income tax due on that, let's just make up a number. Let's say it was $6,000. I have 3 years to pay that back, so I could pay it in $2,000 increments over the next 3 years. So it gives you a little bit of liquidity access to some funds.
So if you took that, let's say $10,000 now, and you have 3 years to pay it back, and you don't pay it back, you don't pay the taxes on year 1 or 2, all of it's due in year 3.
That's correct. So we're still, the industry is still waiting for a little bit of further guidance with regards to how that's going to be handled, because the first initial talking point that came from it was that tax, to your point, would be spread in thirds, and you'd have to pay it each of those 3 years, which of course brought up the question, well, what if you paid the tax in years 1 and 2 and then put it all back in year 3? Do you get the money back? So the industry is waiting for some actual guidance on exactly how that will be treated, but we do know that the CARES Act has passed into law with the kind of like the 36,000 foot view that I mentioned.
So you said 401k, you said SEP, you said IRA at one point, I think.
I did.
Does that apply to Roth IRA?
So that's an excellent question. So as you might be aware, a Roth IRA is actually an account that would grow tax-free. So yes, that 10% waiver does exist on your Roth IRA. However, if you choose to take that distribution from your Roth IRA, any of the money distributed would count as taxable income and be subject, not all of it, any of the earnings portion of what's distributed would count as taxable income, because one of the features of a Roth IRA is that the earnings become tax-free after 5 years and 59 and a half. So you still wouldn't get the tax-free nature of the earnings. That would be taxable, but you would not pay that 10% penalty. And same rules apply with that 3-year waiver.
Okay. Yeah, so you can put it back within
You
3
can.
years and be safe. Okay.
Now, the only other portion that we need to know is that if you do choose to take a distribution, it's limited to $100,000.
Okay.
So if you had a 401k that had $700,000 in it, you're still only limited to $100,000 on this particular CARES Act provision. The last bit on that for a 401k is that 401ks have a loan provision if your employer offers it, and there's typically a limit on how much can be lent against the 401k. That limit has actually been doubled.
Okay, good. Good.
So those are kind of like the major key points for participants in retirement accounts, self-employed people, business owners, and the SBA defines a small business owner as the owner of a company that employs under 500 people. And also for anybody who might find themselves unfortunately unemployed at this time.
And a statistic that I heard today was, you don't think about it, but we have I believe it's a $20 trillion economy. We brought it to a $10 trillion economy overnight with the lockdown or self-isolation. But 50% of that economy is considered small business.
And not only that, I think that 90%, something to that effect, of new jobs created in 2019 were directly attributable to small businesses. And it might not have been exactly 90, but it was definitely a number that's eye-opening.
Yep. Small businesses do drive, and as a small business, you're a small business. We are strong proponents of supporting small business. Some of the rules in play now don't really do that. They support the big box establishments, but when you get a chance, support the small businesses in your community.
Absolutely.
Next question, is there a way to save on taxes if you haven't filed yet for the 2019? Because the deadline was extended to July 15th.
That is correct. So if you have not yet filed your taxes for 2019, or one other caveat I'll throw in there is if you already have filed, there are a couple of things that you can do. Number one is talk to your financial professional or accountant to determine if you qualify for a 2019 traditional IRA contribution, which is deductible, or if you're a small business, if you haven't made your profit sharing contribution for 2019 yet, you can go ahead and make that contribution prior to the July 15th deadline and use that as a tax deduction on your 2019 taxes. The reason I mentioned if you already filed is if it turns out that you're eligible for that contribution and you've already filed, you can now go ahead and make that contribution and file an amended tax return prior to July 15th. That will actually correct the one you already filed, showing the extra deduction. Another way you can do it is if you had made charitable contributions in 2019 that typically you were not able to deduct, keep those records, and if you can, provide that to your tax preparer, or if you're using your own software, put that data into your software, because charitable deductions limitations have actually been increased a little bit under the CARES Act. So there's not a whole host of home run opportunities here that we can use to still save on taxes for last year, but these are a couple that potentially might be available.
Awesome. So what if you haven't filed yet?
So if you haven't filed yet, certainly take a look and see if you have the eligibility for that IRA contribution. And in addition, certainly take a peek at those charitable contributions. It's the same advice, simply because if you've already filed, you can file that amendment, as opposed to if you haven't filed. Those are realistically the two most important things that can be done for last year based on this year. Another thing that you can do, and it's not going to help you save on taxes last year, but if you look at your 2019 tax return, if you already have filed, and see that you were given money back, in other words, you got money back. And a lot of people say, oh, I got money back from taxes. No, you didn't get money back from taxes. You simply got some of the money that you overpaid the government during the year paid back to you because you gave the government too much money. So if you got a refund in 2019, talk to a tax professional or a financial professional about that and adjust your 2020 withholdings so your paycheck increases and have less tax taken out. That's another option.
I remember my father saying, don't loan the government any money you don't have to loan them.
Exactly. I am a big fan personally in the Cat's House of owing the government a little bit when we file our taxes, because that means that I didn't give them a loan for anything.
There you go.
That money looks better in my account all year than their account.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if we're going to prioritize a little bit, what bills or debts should I prioritize if it's a cash crunch right now? Let's say laid off, and I read these online constantly, like in the state of Pennsylvania right now, people are in early March trying to get unemployment filed and they've been laid off that long. So there's no cash coming in. Unemployment hasn't kicked in. Nobody's gotten the loans or anything like that really rolling, or they got, the $1,200 incentive checks. So what should we prioritize?
So I almost think of it like the hierarchy of needs. So if you're thinking hierarchy of needs, what do you need to be secure? Food and shelter are probably your top two most important priorities. So my argument is, if you're prioritizing your bills, rule number one, put a roof over your head. Pay your mortgage, pay your rent. That should be the most important piece. Now, if you have a landlord, if you're a renter who is very flexible and easy to work with, who's willing to work something out with you, by all means, try to work something out with that landlord, but make sure they know their priority number one. I've heard some people talking about getting a 3-month forgiveness on their mortgage payment. I've spoken with several bankers. They're not, from what I understand, giving you a 3-month free ride. They're simply saying, don't pay your mortgage for 3 months, but month 4, you owe us 4 months worth of payments. That's not really any sort of great forgiveness. They're just simply saying, we'll just tack on those 3 months to month number 4. They're not tacking it on to the end, which would make some sense.
Right.
So talk to your lender if that particularly becomes a case. If that's a struggle, try to prioritize paying that bill. The second thing is food. Make sure you're buying your groceries. And what I say there is, I know that kind of goes without saying, but as far as paying bills, your car company, if you have a lease payment, will probably be willing to work out a lease extension with you if you contact them. Don't just not pay Ford or Honda.
Don't bury your head in the sand.
Exactly. Reach out. They understand what's going on. And you can talk to these lenders about getting some adjustments to your car lease or your car loan. Talk to your insurance company. I know in the state of New Jersey and also in the state of New York, the governor of both states has actually put in place certain insurance rules. For example, if your life insurance premiums are coming due, there's a new additional grace period on those payments. Auto insurance, homeowners insurance, renters insurance, there's additional grace period that the state has mandated on all of these insurance policies. Talk to those carriers if you've got a bill coming up about making payment arrangements. But again, those top two, put a roof over your head and your family's head and put food on the table. And when I say put food on the table, your priority has to be getting groceries into your house. So if you used to be that eat out 7 nights a week family, unfortunately you can't order in 7 nights right now if you're in a cash crunch. I mean, you can, but that's probably not one of the better priorities in my opinion. Just get some food on the table. Those are the top 2. Number 3, if you have outstanding credit card debt, which we talked about before. As anybody knows, if you have outstanding credit card debt, the interest tacks onto the principal every month. And that just revolves. That's why they call a credit card revolving debt, meaning the interest revolves and the balance revolves on a monthly basis. Speak to your credit card company. talk to them about adjusting the interest. Talk to them about adjusting the minimum balance. See if they can give you a 2-month, 3-month, 6 months, something grace period where they may not revolve the interest, but make good on it. Tell them that you can make the minimum payment, $20, $30, whatever the case may be, because the lenders are very, very willing to work with you, provided you're willing to show them good faith. But
Awesome.
like you said, don't bury your head in the sand.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes that's what happens. That is what happens with people's health. So it happens with their finances. They just hope it's somehow going to magically go away or resolve. And I wish I could say I saw that happen more, but it doesn't.
Exactly. You know, on a completely different topic, I talk to older clients about long-term care insurance, worrying about long-term planning from time to time. And I joke with people that this is the insurance policy that you don't want to buy, but when you do want to buy it, you are not permitted to buy it. And they always look at me like, Brad, what are you talking about? And my answer is, once you realize that you need this, it's too late, and the insurance company will not insure you, because when you realize you need it, it's because you know some sort of qualifying event is about to happen. The doctor knows it, and that means the insurance company is going to know it and not underwrite. So I think I get your point there. It's certainly not lost on me.
Gotcha. So you sent a newsletter out last week, and I made sure I read it.
Thank you.
And I found it interesting because you were talking about, down and then the rebound last week and then another down as a potential. So you explain a little bit to our listeners.
Sure. So one of the things, as you mentioned, is I've been sending out to my clients and to anybody who has opted in, and it's very easy to opt into my daily newsletter. We'll give you that information after the Facebook Live. But I send a daily update out while everything has been kind of unfolding during this pandemic, mainly to put a lot of perspective. Because as I mentioned earlier, when you asked me what we do, I say we like to educate people about their money so they make good decisions and can get smart about their money and navigate those big moments so that when these landmines happen, we're prepared. But often when they happen, people lose perspective. So I've been trying to keep that perspective. So I was talking about up days and down days, and there's certainly been no shortage of significantly big volatility on the market over the last 5 to 6 weeks. So when the market drops more than 20% from a prior high, that's what Wall Street calls a bear market. Once you've crossed below 20%, which we did, you're in what they call bear market territory. And now any sort of a rally or a recovery from that could be the next bull market starting, or it could be what sometimes people refer to as a bear market rally, a sucker's rally. Sometimes they call it, and this is a little crass, but sometimes they call it a dead cat bounce, because the concept there is even a dead cat drops from high enough will bounce. I know that's a little gross, but that's where the terminology comes from. So the jury is basically currently still out on this current rally off of the bottoms from March 23rd, which is now north of 20%, which by definition is actually a bull market. A bull market is defined as a 20% run off of a prior low. So we are in a new bull market. The question is, to your point, is are we looking at a bull market rally within the context of a bear market or a real bull market rally? If it's a real bull market rally, it's going to have to clear some technical hurdles to undo some of the damage that professional traders, that they call the institutions, look for. And that's one of the things that we at Lifelong Investments look for as we advise our clients on what to do. If that fails, the market will turn around and go back down. A lot of the news anchors are calling for what they call a retest of the lows. A retest of the lows means we're going to go back down to the prior low from March. Are we going to be able to hold that low and come back up off of it? That would mean the rally is potentially still intact. Or are we going to go through it and reach new lower lows? And I say that right now we feel pretty good about this rally, but the reason I commented that the jury is still out is that we've seen this before. Think back to the Great Recession of 2008, 2009. The market effectively initially crashed in October of 2008. Then we ended up with this ridiculously great, strong rally the last week of October. I want to say we were up like 12% that week. November, we ended up down to new lower lows. We had a great rally through the month of December, ending December poorly. Then in January, we made yet additional lows, rallied again, made new lows. And we didn't make our final bottom in that cycle till March of 2009. There were several rally attempts that were pretty big that ultimately failed. Another good example would be the stock market crash Black Monday of 1987. In October of 1987, the market lost 22%. The Dow Jones Industrials lost 22% in one day. Then the following week, we lost another pretty sizable number. I'm going to say like another 7%. We had a great rally in November, but ultimately didn't make our new low, our official cycle low, until late November. So we had actually gone down and made a secondary low after that crash. Now, we had a fabulous rally into the end of the year, and by the end of 1988, the market had already made up the entire crash of 87 and had set a new high. So let's keep that longer term perspective as well.
Gotcha. So we've been all over the place, from the CARES Act to cash on hand to retirement funds. So is there anything we missed that somebody needs to think about to have healthier finances during this crisis that we're in right now?
Absolutely. The most important thing is, if you are financially able to, don't panic. And the reason I say that's the most important thing is there's an old adage on Wall Street that says the greatest wealth transfer is the transfer of moving money from those who panic to those who are patient. So don't panic. That's rule number one. And then we want to kind of hit that checklist. Get that emergency fund bill. Make sure your risk tolerance has been assessed or reassessed. Compare that with what you currently own, and then act accordingly. Those are really the three takeaways for what you should do right now while this thing is going on.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Brad, for your time. You provided us a ton of information, and we're going to put the link in the comment section or in the header to this for the risk assessment quiz, and we'll also put the link for your newsletter. If you could send that over, we'll get it.
Absolutely. That would be very easy to do, and I'd encourage anybody to do it. It doesn't cost you a cent to see what your risk looks like.
And I'll give him a thumbs up. I read his newsletter.
Thank you.
It's not a technical nightmare. It's plain talk, just like he gave it to us right now, of here's the way it is, here's the way it is, here's the way. Put it in perspective, look at the big picture, not just, oh my God, I went and looked at my accounts today and, they're through the floor. Or tomorrow they're through the roof. So I appreciate your time. I know we've talked a lot over the last week or so getting prepared for this, and you've had some long days.
Yes.
So working from home is a little different animal than going into the office every day.
That's for sure. It's like you almost work. I'm sure those of us that are listening to you right now can probably attest. It feels like you almost work longer hours when you're working from home than when you have an office to go to. Or is that
Absolutely.
Just me?
No, you're 100% right. And there's a very good podcast I'm going to listen to tomorrow. It talks just about that, setting yourself those parameters that you don't feel the necessity to come in and do something. You've already put in an 8 or 10 hour day. Stop. So, but again, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. I hope everybody got some great information for this. We'll also put Brad's contact information in case you want to reach out to him, get more detailed information, talk to him personally about what's going on with yours.
Happy to help. And thank you again, Dr. Bennett, for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Brad, take care, keep the family safe, and we'll talk to you soon.
You the same.
Thank you.